All right, everybody hold tight with us. If you're already in here, you know we got to get our links fired up. I think we're at least good to go in live, Chris.
All right.
I think it maybe even played your little intro video, maybe. I heard something.
Look at that.
Maybe. I don't know. We don't quite completely know what we're doing yet, guys, but we are doing our best. And we got plenty to talk about today. So, like I say, y'all just hang tight. Whenever we do these, I have to embed it on our front page. Several things we have to do. I have to post it on Twitter, post it on Facebook, and turn on monetization. So if y'all just hang tight, we're gonna get to all your questions. And I have to upload a thumbnail because right now, Chris, the thumbnail is a picture of you with your eyes shut.
Lovely. Yeah, let's go ahead and change that, make that a priority on the list. Not sure why it pulled that.
I think on the live stuff, it's just completely random.
Yeah.
Like it just pulls whatever it wants to pull. So y'all hang tight. Chris, I understand you're gonna get away a little bit tomorrow.
We're looking into the possibility. We'll put it that way. We're considering getting out of the house for a little bit, and we're gonna, use that as a little dangled carrot for the kids as well.
Yeah.
My oldest actually just came in the room before we started recording, asking me lots of questions about you, asking if you had kids, asking all sorts of stuff about you. Because we said that you'd gone to the beach, and I don't know, maybe if that's why you're fresh in their mind. So we had an education session about Mr. West, as they call you.
Wow. That's
They're really curious about your life and your lifestyle. They must find you very interesting.
I don't know why. All right, y'all hang tight. Sorry, we are about ready to roll. Hopefully we got some folks in here today. Because we're not doing Instagram this time, YouTube only. So anyway, all right, we'll get started. I'll knock out a couple more of these while we're talking. Hopefully you can hear us and see us loud and clear on YouTube, and just put your questions in the chat. If you're watching on the embed on Gamecock Central, then you're gonna have to put your questions in the thread on the Insiders Forum. So either be a Gamecock Central subscriber and on the actual site, or come on over to our YouTube and hit the subscribe button on there too, because it's free. All right, so he's Chris, I'm Wes, talking Gamecock football as we have been for the last, I think we've been on a roll now, Chris. This is probably, a month and a half of these videos we've done, maybe longer, at least once a week. So hopefully you're enjoying them. Hopefully you are a subscriber on our YouTube. But plenty to talk about. As we say this every time. There's plenty to talk about still. And the big news, I would say this week, the biggest news, not unexpected, but at least is important as far as making things official. The NCAA announcing, we're recording this on Thursday, we're live on Thursday. That was on Wednesday. The NCAA basically said schools can come back on June 1 as far as football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. Well, that essentially puts it on the schools to then. It's basically, it's not saying you have to come back on June 1. It's saying that the schools now have the ability to come back on June 1, because previously they had no, basically student athlete, no activities until May 31st. So they came back, they said they're not going to extend that. Good to go for June 1. Now you have an SEC vote that will take place on Friday. That's going to be the SEC presidents and chancellors who will, based on what they're being told by their medical people, vote on the dates when it will be allowed for you to come back. So The dates that have been thrown out there, a lot have been June 1, June 15th. Those are actually just two of the dates that were actually on the docket, June 1, June 15th, June 30th. There was even a July 15th, and actually August 1 was even discussed. It doesn't sound like we're trending that way at all. I saw Ohio State has already said they're going back, obviously not SEC, but they're going back on July 8th. So I think it's trending that way. Chris, my guess is that the SEC will come back and say June 1. At the latest, they may say June 15th, but then put it on the schools to then make the decision for themselves when they think it's safe to go ahead and start. I don't think it's obviously not going to be like, hey, you have to come back at that point. It's more a matter of, hey, as a conference, we're allowing you to come back. If your area, if your school, if everybody there is prepared, and I believe, Muschamp's done a couple of interviews from some things I've heard behind the scenes, and I believe he even said it in one of the interviews. I think they've been preparing for all the potential dates. So basically, whenever the SEC says, my guess, Chris, you'll see South Carolina turn right around. And although, June 1 is not far away, but I believe they've been putting in the plans to go ahead and get everybody back whenever the SEC sort of officially lets that happen.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard the same thing, Wes. Everybody is preparing, number one, as if things are starting on time, but number two, to get back as early as possible. Will that definitely happen? We don't know. I think that's the expectation. I think the expectation is that we're going to see, or what I expect rather, based on what we've heard, is that we're going to see either June 1 or June 15th in terms of the SEC pass, and for these guys to come back. And I've heard many programs around the conference have plans ready to go, ready to spring in action, if indeed they're allowed back then. Seems like that's what it'll happen sometime in June, just so those guys can get back again. That'll be more of a voluntary thing, but people have had a lot of time around college football, and in this conference in particular, to prepare for these different scenarios, because once this happened with players being sent home, coaches not being allowed in the building, in-person recruiting not being allowed, et cetera, really all people had to do, aside from recruiting and doing some team stuff as they could in virtual meetings, is try to figure out what would we do in these different scenarios. And then power brokers and decision makers have taken a lot of time to run models on everything from how long do the players need, how long could they feasibly get to return, whether it's voluntary stuff, and then whether you get into actual training camp before the season, because you got to let these guys get back in pads and go hit each other in practice at some point to get ready. Everything from that to things like fans and how you can let them in. So there's been a lot of time devoted to that. And that's why I totally agree with you. As soon as, hey, here's the decision, here's what it is, here's what you'll be allowed to do, schools are going to be able to say, all right, here's our plan. They'll be able to disseminate it very quickly and really go with it. And a bunch of schools, if not everybody that participates in college football across the country, has those things ready to go.
Yeah, and I think a point that Muschamp has been very quick to make, Chris, during all of this, and he made it again in one of the interviews yesterday, I think it was ESPN Charleston maybe, was that the decisions being made aren't being made by him. They're not being made by even Ray Tanner or President Bob Caslin. They're being made by the school's medical officials as far as at the South Carolina level. So I think there's always a little bit of concern from some people, obviously, about whether this is the right thing to do or not. And, you have everybody, we're not going to get into all the different maybe spots on the scale that different people are at right now from one end to the other about what this virus means and what's right and what's not. But I liked Muschamp's point, and I think we've talked about it as well, but it's worth repeating. If the guys are on campus, then it's going to be a much more sanitary environment, a much more controlled environment. And, there are rules in place that are more stringent than essentially what you're going to see just in day-to-day life. And basically, I think all the guys will be tested as they get back to campus. Caslin has said that every single student will get tested before they come back in the fall, and you're going to have the guys working out in pods. So basically they're separated. You're not going to have 60 people slammed into a weight facility breathing on each other. I think that frankly the college football players who are already back will probably be some of the safest people in America as far as having the policies in place around them and the people around them in order to make sure that remains the case. Am I off base with that? I know that there's no way to completely reduce risk, but if the guys have to find a way to stay in shape and get in shape anyway, then, and that's not, I'm not even talking about just the aspect of having a strength coach right beside you, making sure A, you're pushing yourself, but B, that you're doing a lift or a workout or an exercise safely. I'm just talking about the virus aspect, but there are many other reasons, from safety in lifts to nutrition to having structure in your life. There are many other reasons that I believe being on campus and with that staff is incredibly safe.
It is. And you do have to consider that if you are going to proceed with the season as usual and ask these players to go out there and play a game that's, can be violent, and then there can be injuries, and you have to be extremely well conditioned to play it at this high of a level, especially, you have to give them adequate time to prepare. And that's why so much time's been devoted to, okay, we've heard Will Muschamp say, I think the players need 8 weeks. Now, will they get that? We don't know. If they do something in June, the players are going to have at least 8 weeks because they'll have voluntary, and then when they open it back up with the team. But they've run models in terms of getting the team back together as a whole for, say meetings, OTA style practices, training camp that you normally have for a month, say in August leading up to the season or late July. They've run models of anywhere from 4 to 8 weeks for reopening. We don't know that yet. What we're talking about now is sort of the first phase, and that is, hey, get these guys back on campus and then allow them to start working out in the facilities. And there are going to be some protocols, that we really don't know yet, but there will be, I would imagine, ample protocols put into place. I mean, Gamecock football just tweeted out a picture of the coaches. They're back in the office now, but they're all sitting way apart in one of the meeting rooms. They've all got masks on. Now what will they do for the players? We don't know yet, but it's going to be pretty stringent, at least at first. There's been a lot of time devoted to what these protocols will be. And you're right. If you're asking the players to play the game, got to give them a chance to do it at a high level where it's safe for them. And so nutrition and all those different things are very important. I'll be curious to see, football players are already a little bit isolated in terms of during the day because of the facility so much, but they are, say they're going to class, they're out in the general public. They can go out to eat off campus. They can go socialize at night when they get a few spare moments. If they have a night off or something, they're at the Doty with, other athletes from other sports. So there are opportunities to get out in the public at large. What I'm saying is you have to be careful with those instances too, because there's a couple components to it. I think number one, when you're talking about trying not to get this thing to spread around to your team, you think about the safety aspect, and we don't have to get into all that because we may get some people saying, well, it's pretty safe for young people. For the most part, that's true, but not 100%. You don't want people catching the virus just in general. And secondly, you do have to think about your team. That's secondary to actual health, public safety. But if you get one person on your team, with the virus, then what? And we've seen a lot of stuff coming out about, recommendations, and those stuff. Some of them aren't really on the college level. It's just recommendations put out by people. But do you have to quarantine a section of the team? Do you end up losing part of your team during the season? So these are the types of considerations that, medical professionals at the university, the athletics department, and these coaches and players, are all going to have. It's multifaceted, and I'll be very curious to see what all is done, to help alleviate some of those concerns.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I think, like we said, those things are already being talked about. They're already being put in place, and we don't know what all they will be. But I think pretty instantly you'll have some communication from, the staff and Muschamp, George Wynn, all those guys with the players about what exactly is going to be done. And I think for the most part, I don't want to speak for every player, Chris. Obviously, we can't do that, but it seems like the guys, for the most part, I believe, are just excited to get back and are missing ball and are missing being around their teammates. Maybe there's a guy or two who's concerned about everything. Maybe there obviously maybe some parents, but for the most part, I think probably around college football. Football is what these kids do. I mean, the amount of time and effort and energy that they put into football in normal times on a day-to-day basis is insane. And most people, I dare say, have no idea how much time these kids put into it. So to go from that, everybody wants a break, but I imagine these are competitive, like the top 1% of competitors and of athletes. They're ready to get back to what they do, I think. So, there are concerns, there are things where we have to be careful, I think, but for the most part, I think the kids are ready to get back and go play and do their thing. Okay, so let's shift a little bit. We talked about this on the podcast some earlier in the week. Muschamp again has done a lot of interviews on the radio this week, getting past everything coming back and the players coming back. A little bit of actual football talk. Chris, is there anything throughout basically all the talks, but certainly the recent ones, that has maybe caught your eye or caught your attention about this team football wise that Muschamp has said? I think we've seen him, I think he even said it. He was hesitant at first really to talk much football considering what the country was going through. And now I think he's, he did the teleconference with the media. I don't know when that was, a month or so ago, but he's, I think, been a little bit more open to talk football here recently because it's looking positive. Things are starting to open back up. But has anything really stood out or caught your attention?
One thing and I'd really like to let you talk about this a little bit more because I think you had some better insight on it, especially when we're talking about on the pod, but schematics, I think was sort of interesting. You can dive a little bit more into that, but I will touch on it briefly in that, you talked about the offense a little bit, specifically the run game and sort of what it was going to look like, because we have been all sort of waiting. We've gotten a lot of questions about that. What is the scheme going to look like? Is it going to be more Colorado State, more Georgia? Probably some of both, but I think he had some interesting comments on that regarding just the run game and the pass game and sort of what to expect as they've had time to dive into the film. And hey, they did have 5 practices in the spring, which is a positive for them. Some people didn't get that. And so that was one thing that stood out. Another, I'll mention this one because it's important, and we've also gotten a ton of questions about that, is Zaquandre White. Still anticipating that the junior college running back Zaquandre White will be able to get to campus sometime before this fall semester. It'll be later, July, August. He's got some things to finish up and still got some work to do, but as of right now, it looks like he's still on track, and that would be a significant boost to South Carolina's running back room. A guy to pair with Marshawn Lloyd and a couple returners and Kevin Harris and Deshaun Fenwick, a guy that's got some speed, athleticism, and talent, and already has some college experience, a bit at FSU and junior college experience. So I think he's someone that could help them fairly early if he can get acclimated. And first step is he's got to get on campus. But I think that was a positive for the program when you hear that he's still on track.
Yeah, and I think that fits right in with what we're about to talk about, the scheme and maybe some schematic changes. And by the way, if you're on our YouTube, definitely hit the chat and send us your questions. I see we have a couple, Timothy Yates and Kyle Foster. Definitely going to get to you here in a second. And yeah, everybody else hit us with your questions, and we'll sort of go from there. Football, recruiting, or just big picture, whatever it is, we'll talk about it. And yeah, I think that's the most, not that there was even a ton of detail, but Chris, I think that was probably the most detail we have seen or heard Muschamp give, just talking openly about the scheme. For the most part, I think when Bobo got to South Carolina, then, they always have the little preseason or pre-spring, I should say, Muschamp press conference. Then Bobo himself spoke. Yet I think everybody was wanting to know what's the scheme going to look like. For the most part, the answer was always, we don't know yet. And that it's going to depend on the talent. It's going to depend on the skill set of the players. It's going to depend on what can they do and what can they do well, what can they do consistently. that's still the case. I don't think that's changed, but that was the most open I think that we've heard the staff be about what these changes could possibly look like. Now we know there's going to be more under center. We've known that from the beginning. We know they're going to implement a fullback. We've known that from the beginning. But I believe that's the first time we've heard Will Muschamp say, "Hey, this running scheme will look completely different." And I think you look back to some things he said last year towards the end of the year and how he wanted to see some more different runs as far as that were called. I think in listening to him on these radio interviews, I think just more runs in general, not necessarily more different calls, but just running the football a bit more. And I think we've seen Muschamp sort of talk more and more about the idea of, hey, as a staff, we have to put these offensive guys in a better spot than maybe we did last year with a freshman quarterback. And I think I'll give Muschamp all the credit in the world when he said that. He said that ultimately falls on me, but there's a reason there was a change in play caller. It's harsh, but it's true. So I think that with Bobo, you are going to obviously see a little bit different scheme, maybe a little bit more of the running game. And I think getting a guy like Zaquandre White in is part of that equation. I think at this point, it is very dangerous most of the time to say, "Oh, this true freshman is going to come in and be the guy." But that would be one of the biggest shocks of the entire season for me if Marshawn Lloyd isn't outstanding this year. Like I have very high expectations for him. I think the next thing is, how much progress does a Kevin Harris make? Can he stay healthy? That's been his biggest issue. Deshaun Fenwick, you hear a little bit more positive things about him. But Zaquandre White, he's sort of the wild card of this bunch. Can he come in, get acclimated, get back in football shape, and maybe help provide that 1-2 punch? And I don't want to forget like Rashad Amos. I think they're actually pretty high on him as well, even though he's the forgotten guy. But I thought that was interesting just to hear the detail of that. And this is we talked about this on the pod. I think this to me is going to be a team that needs to run the football, stay on the field at times, not turn the football over, and let their defense keep them in games. At the end of the year, when you're throwing the ball more than you're running it, putting the ball right back, in the opponent's hands, going 3 and out, putting your defense right back on the field, that just is not going to fly. And I think that's the biggest maybe big picture goal for this team going into next year is, man, you've got to find a way for this offense to just stay on the field a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, 2 areas that we've highlighted in the past, red zone play, third down conversion percentage. I don't have it in front of me. I remember we pulled it on a podcast several weeks ago in South Carolina. I mean, basically the overall point to drive home is that they were near the bottom of the country in both of those categories last year. And if you can't convert third downs and if you're inefficient in the red zone, you're going to have a hard time scoring and staying on the field. And we definitely saw that, especially towards the end of last year. South Carolina was up and down offensively. They had some really good performances, and then they had some really poor performances, especially later in the year. Injury bug hit. Teams figured out schematically maybe what they were doing a little bit up front. You touched on that, Wes, with just need to be more effective and maybe more diverse. But overall, however you get there, more effective in the run game. And their inability to do that, at the end of the year, they couldn't run it very effectively. They couldn't pass it very effectively. And that really hurt them on third down. And the defense, even in games, I mean, you look at the Texas A&M game and you go, well, they didn't play. How many points did they give up in that game? 30-something points, I think. You say, well, that's not a good stat line. The defense didn't play well. They did. They really played well that game up until later. They were on the field way too much. South Carolina was 3 and out pretty consistently. And so those are a couple areas. And, you look at Mike Bobo, and he's got a really good offensive track record. Did he have a ton of talent at Georgia most of the time? Yes. Now maybe they can recruit similar talent to South Carolina and be able to turn those guys loose, and that'd certainly be a positive. But he did some really good things at Colorado State on the offensive side of the ball as well, put up some big numbers there. scored a touchdown on the opening drive, I think 9 times last year. I think it was. At one point they were tied with LSU as the only teams in the country that had done that. And he's put up some really nice numbers in terms of third down conversions during his career as well. So I think, the run game is always, a huge part of the offense. But for South Carolina, it's an area they got to get better in, because they really need to get better in that area of, being able to stay on the field. So finding the run game, finding some playmakers at receiver, playing better at quarterback, staying healthy. I mean, just staying healthy on this entire ball club is something that, they really haven't done consistently. And you can talk about all the different reasons for that, but I think there's just so many different factors when you look at the offense. And maybe if this team could stay healthy, Mike Bobo's got a track record of maybe being able to plug some things in that could help them. And certainly his knowledge and what he's seen, he's been around a while.
Definitely. Let's get to these questions on the chat, and y'all be sure to send them in. We got a few people sending them in. Craig wants to know how to get a shirt. You know what? We sold Gamecock Central shirts at one point, and I thought it was going to be a great idea. Like, I thought we'd have several people buy them, and then it didn't really. I don't know if people didn't know about it, or if there just wasn't a market for it like I thought there would be. But I don't know, man. Chris, do we still have access to get? I mean, if somebody wants a shirt, do we have access to get one for them to buy?
That's a great question. We need to ask that. Maybe Wes, maybe if the price is right, we can just give one of our own.
Yeah, hey Craig, how what size you wear, man?
How bad do you want it? No, I can't. I've only, myself, I've only got, I think I've got a black and a white, and that's about it. As far as this newer style, I've got a couple older ones. The workout shirts are really good. The tees.
Yeah.
Need some more of those, man.
Yeah, if the boss man is watching, we need some more shirts, and Craig, we'll I'll look into that, man. That's a good idea. I've always thought that would be maybe a little side revenue stream, or really honestly, just it's free. If you buy a shirt and then walk around with it, that's free advertising for us. So honestly, I don't even know if it's anything we're trying to make money off of, just something, another way for us to spread the word. So I'll let you know about that. Let's go through and hit a couple of these. Let's see, Timothy Yates, who is BM_12 on Gamecock Central. It's going to be interesting to see what it looks like this fall. I know as a high school coach, we are faced with so much uncertainty with the number of players and coaches allowed and how we manage it. Chris, that's a good point. I think you look at the way that these colleges are going to have to manage things. It's gonna be really tough to be a high school football coach without just some of the financial advantages that major college football programs have, and being able to implement some of these things. I know high school football coaches are already, to me, some of the hardest working people that you will find. The amount of hours that goes into being a high school football coach, and a lot of times probably unpaid hours if you really break it down. It's impressive, but that's going to be tough, man. And you're going to have obviously a set of standards that I'm sure the South Carolina High School League, as far as our state goes, will come out with. But that's another aspect of this that I think is going to be, frankly, it'd be kind of hard to work through, I think.
Yeah, you look at the high school level. First of all, you're right about coaches. I'll vouch for that. Those guys, it is undervalued how much they do, the amount of hours they put in, because you consider a lot of these guys are teaching too. Like, you think about, they're helping their kids with their recruiting. They're making sure their grades are good. They're trying to brand. Branding is bigger in high school ball now. So they're on social media trying to brand their program. They're trying to coach. And then during the day, a lot of times they're teaching or dealing with things in high schools that are, they're difficult to deal with. So I have the immense respect for those guys, whether it's assistants or whether it's coaches, and some coaches are athletics directors. So then you're dealing with a whole bunch of sports at your school. And if you're if you're a coach and an AD at the high school level, then man, you got your plate full because of these reasons. When you're talking about a school like South Carolina, just to draw a parallel here, or maybe a contrast rather is the right word. South Carolina is an athletic department that's in good shape financially, which is not really typical in college athletics. You think college athletics, big money. Yeah, a lot of them are still operating in the red. They're bringing in a lot of money, but they're spending a ton. South Carolina, from a budget standpoint, operates in the black, which is great, but they're still going to be affected in a big way. We see coaches take pay cuts. There's going to be some other things that are probably going down the pipe. They're going to lose a lot of revenue this year, depending on the fan amounts. We're probably not going to have full stadiums this year. We don't know for sure, but that's sort of where it's at right now. So there's a lot of concession revenue, ticket revenue, refunds at the university level. They're issuing tuition and housing refunds, all those things. So they're losing millions of dollars, but they'll be able to sustain, and probably not have to cut any sports and things like that. When you look at high school, they already missed a high school baseball season. If they didn't have high school football this year, then you're talking about probably missing spring sports again next year, and which is, you're going to take 2 years away from kids. And so it's a really difficult balancing act, because college athletics, you're talking about South Carolina having a 40 something million distribution from the SEC for TV money, bowl rights. Then they have things like, fan ticket money, concessions, marketing, et cetera, dollars coming in, apparel, they've got all those things. At high school level, football drives, just as it does in college, the revenue, but you also, your gate, the ticket revenue that you're bringing in high school football is really, in some cases, your only source of revenue, or it's definitely your main one. They don't have all these other things. So it becomes a lot more difficult, to balance for high schools. And that's another reason why, I think to just be able to sustain athletics, I think they're going to have the high school season as well. And I'll be very, very curious. I think it's even more critical for high school than college to get fans in the stands. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that happens.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. Hey, Travis McDonald is on here. Mr. Gamecock Tickets. Appreciate the shout out there, buddy. I think Chris, he was the employee of the month, employee of the week. By some, I don't remember who gave you that, Travis, but congrats. I saw your employee of the. You got some award this week, so good job, man. I know it's been wild for y'all, for all of us, but definitely does a great job, works hard, and represents South Carolina in a great way. And we appreciate him being on our message board and sort of helping people get squared away with their Gamecock tickets on there. If you've ever seen USC ticket sales on our board, he's the guy behind it. So we definitely appreciate that. Let's see. Keep hitting questions. If you got any more, we actually got a decent amount of people on here right now. Kyle Foster, how would you say the Gamecocks have fared in the recruiting game during all of this? I think, we've talked big picture recruiting a lot, so I won't sort of spend 15 minutes on it, but I do think it's been a challenge for South Carolina and for a lot of schools, frankly. And for South Carolina, the fact you're coming off the season, that they had, the fact that it hasn't been a great year in the state of South Carolina as far as 2021 recruit, just upper level recruits. It's actually ended up being a little bit better than maybe we thought on paper, in my opinion. But there's not a Jordan Birch in the state of South Carolina for 2021. There's not. I would say there's not a Luke Doty. There's not a Zach Pickens in the state for 2021. So all this combination of things, the fact that North Carolina and Tennessee, Chris, we talk about how hard it is at South Carolina right now from an aspect of the fact that Clemson is on top of the world. Georgia under Kirby Smart has been really good. And now, as far as recruiting goes, you have Tennessee on the upswing and North Carolina on the upswing. So you have if you're South Carolina, all around you, you have programs that are either on the up and up on the field or have developed that perception, and it's paid off in recruiting. So sometimes it's tough to land guys, but I think, the fans have gotten a little bit maybe uneasy or impatient right now because of where recruiting is as far as the quantity, I should say, of players. But you look at the quality, they're off to a really good start, I think, as far as the players that they have committed. I like all of their takes so far. The one guy I didn't know much about, I would say, frankly, is Marcellus Dial, but that's more just I didn't know much about him as opposed to any knock on him as a player. But I think you look at these other guys, I think they're excited about the ones they do have. We'll see. That's part of this we haven't talked about so far today is, okay, now that student athletes can potentially get back in June, what does that look like for recruiting? When will recruits be allowed? And I think that's a different conversation because football players or basketball players, whatever, you're sort of bringing them back. And like we talked about, you're doing everything you can to insulate them from the rest of the world. Well, recruiting, that's not what recruiting is about. Recruiting is about travel and bringing people onto your campus who aren't usually on your campus. So are you going to bring, if you're in Columbia, are you going to bring in people from all over the state? Are you going to bring in people from bordering states and have them travel and then sort of be around your current team? I don't think so. So I think for South Carolina, you're going to see an uptick when guys can visit again, but it's very hard to predict when guys can visit again.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I'm with you. The quantity, especially given the circumstances, recruiting shut down, poor season, all the hot seat stuff, et cetera, to get the 6 guys that they have, I think is strong. And actually, there was one point in the month, and probably still the case, where they had more guys at this time than last cycle. They had 4 at the same, time in terms of progression. The thing is, South Carolina's typically made a lot of hay during the summer, late spring, summer. Last year, I think they got 8 commitments like during camp season, in that month of June, whether it's guys visiting, whether it's guys camping, earning offers, Trey Jones, O'Donnell Fortune come to mind, or even some guys like Jaheim Bell, who took a summer official visit and ended up with South Carolina. Summer is huge. And so, for the most part, spring visits are eliminated. There's no summer visits, there's no camps, or no official or unofficial visits. And so that's why you look at it and you go, ooh, when are they going to get some guys back in? When are they going to be able to, make another push for guys? Now, positive is that they did get some guys on campus earlier in the year. And for South Carolina, part of the recruiting strategy needs to be, and has been really, having some guys wait. This recruiting shutdown, some guys have pumped the brakes. Some guys have said, I'm going to go ahead and commit. Tennessee has, I think, 22 commitments now. Now, how many of those stick? How many go take visits in the season or whenever it's allowed? Chances are a good many of them. We know some of them have already indicated that they're going to go take other visits. So I don't know if you get too caught up in the numbers overall. I do understand the concerns with South Carolina because they need to have a good season. They don't have a super high number of commitments. They need to gain some momentum, and some other schools around them have sort of heated up on the trail, or they're already and typically have done well the past few years. So there's some legitimate concerns there. But for South Carolina, I think the biggest question is, when can you get guys back on campus? Legitimate question. We really don't know. And, just can they have a good season? They need to erase last year. They need to have some guys wait, or even if some guys commit, they need to have those guys stay open for them.
Yeah, we got another question here from Rodney S. It says, okay, you say all that, but this staff needs to think outside the box and recruit in other states outside of South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. I think they have, man. I mean, you look, pretty much isn't every single recruit from a different state, every single commit at this point. You've got a kid who goes to school in Virginia, at least. Bryce Still is from North Carolina, but, you got a guy from Virginia, you got a guy from Alabama. We've seen them. You get Eric Shaw out of Alabama last class. We've seen them recruit Tennessee, spot recruit that area. I mean, your likely starting quarterback is from California. So I believe they've tried to extend out. Now, your brand is at its strongest, I think, around the area where kids see you play, and kids to kids in California, South and North Carolina are the same thing. It's like,
Right.
That's just the Carolinas. I think the closer you are to your campus, the more familiar people are with what you do and what you're about and what your brand is. So you have to, it goes both ways. I think you have to take care of home. Like that's a big part of it. You have to take care of home. Now, can you expand out and spot recruit? If you have a guy who's very interested in the SEC, or maybe you have a lot of kids, I feel like, that have family still in the state of South Carolina that maybe you see them sort of come back and try to look at the program and stuff like that. That pops up a lot. So I think you just have to be resourceful. Maybe add some transfers, if you want to go that route. We've seen them add JUCOs or offer JUCOs, and then you have to, get the top guys in your state, but you also have to find the small town, under recruited, great athletes that maybe people don't know about. So I think recruiting is an inexact. It's not even a science. It's really an art. So yeah, I mean, I think your point is well taken, but I also think that they have tried to do that. Is that is it always easy? No, but it just, the other schools are doing the same things as well, so it can make it difficult. Let's see. Kyle chimes in. The positive in my mind is that we're still making top fives for out of state recruits during COVID. And I think that's a good point, Kyle. You have several kids who are either putting out, top fives or top sevens, or just talking about schools they want to visit in general, that have South Carolina on their list, firmly interested, but in a lot of cases have never visited. Travian Cooley, the running back out of Nightingale, North Carolina, is someone we've talked about a ton. You look here recently, Raheem Sanders, athlete / wide receiver from Florida, K'Wan Powell, running back from Vernon, Florida. There are guys that, I believe Malcolm Johnson, the speedster from Virginia. There are a lot of guys that would have already been on campus. But I think that, Chris, that's a good point by Kyle, is that these kids are at least, you're doing something right. Is it the coaches and that they've made a connection with these kids? Is it that you're an SEC school? Is it that your brand is maybe a little better than we give it credit for? Is it a combination of these things? Probably. But I think the fact that kids are still wanting to visit South Carolina and have them on their list, they're not just saying, well, I'm haven't been able to visit, I'm going to eliminate them. They're still intrigued, at least, by the program.
Yeah, they are. And the recruiting's so far out that these guys, it's not like they just started recruiting these guys a few weeks ago, or during quarantine. There's some guys, of course, that, it's an ongoing process, and they do offer some guys late, but so a lot of those guys that you just mentioned and many others have long relationships with this staff. And so they are intrigued. They look at a lot more than just record. And look, one of the reasons that we've said that South Carolina needs to have a good year this year is they've got some prospects that are legitimately interested, but they just want to make sure things are stable, and they want to see that the program's stable. And of course, what you need this year for that is wins. They like the staff, they like the development record, they like the fan base, the facilities. They've been doing some of these virtual tours, with some of the recruits, and have them interested in coming to see it for themselves. So again, it's just sort of a waiting game with some of these guys, including the ones that you mentioned, Wes, just trying to figure out when recruiting opens and get them on campus, and just have them stay open long enough to do that. If they can do that and have a good year, then things could certainly get right back on track on the field and in recruiting, and they could rebuild some momentum there. I think it's positive that they've gotten off to the start that they have with the 6 commitments. I think things will be a little bit slower from here on out, if I had to guess, until we get some more certainty on the season, or some more certainty on visits. And that's really what it's going to come down to.
Yeah, let's hit on a couple of guys, Chris. I want to get the screen sharing thing going here, if I can get it up here. Y'all hang tight with me. What am I doing? Okay, there we go. I think part of our job, and something we've tried to do a good job of, or do a better job of, Chris, is not just to tell people about who South Carolina has offered and what we're hearing, but really to give them an idea. There's so many offers that go out. Who are the guys that you as a fan need to know about? So not, hey, here's 150, 200 people that have been offered, or hey, here are the handful of guys you need to know. And I think, Chris, a guy we've talked about in both of our little insider pieces this week, is Raheem Sanders, the receiver. Now he does a bit of everything for his current team. I think for South Carolina, he's going to be a wide receiver if they're able to land him. They make the top 5 here. I guess that was yesterday, maybe, or the day before he put it out. But I know we've mentioned this guy, and initially he was sort of in that other category where South Carolina offered him, but maybe we weren't tracking him that closely, but I think whenever you have a new coach at a different position, you kind of see the board change a little bit. And it sounds like Joe Cox has really made this guy a priority. And I think, Chris, you were pretty high on his ability even before when you first watched him. By the way, that play right there is a head coach and an offensive coordinator that probably had a heart attack when this quarterback threw this ball, because that looked like a pick six waiting to happen. But anyway, Raheem, I know schools are recruiting him all over, man, but I think there's a lot to like with Raheem Sanders.
What I like about Raheem is, just from talking to him and sort of watching him interact, and even you can see some of it on the field, is he has that mentality, sort of, he's got that dog in him, how people say that, and he really does. He's a big time competitor, and he's really, really versatile. Schools think he could play wide receiver, running back, linebacker. He could probably play safety, but he just does a lot of things really well. He's got speed. He's tough. He's competitive. He can catch the football. He's good in space. Um, again, can play running back, as you see. And so when you sort of take that mentality, that's one of the things we loved about Deebo Samuel, is he was sort of a running back after he got the football. Now, Raheem's a good bit different than Deebo in terms of style, but when you have a receiver that can do that and is really good in space in the open field, and he's tough, and competitive, you really, really like that. And so there's a lot to like here. And South Carolina is legitimately in the game. I think he's intrigued. I think they do need to get him on campus. So, hey, his timeline is going to be pretty important. I think Florida State's a pretty big factor. It's one of the last places that he visited, before the shutdown. And back in February, they were a pretty big factor. I think they still are, but he is intrigued by South Carolina. I think Joe Cox has done a really nice job, getting in with this kid.
And hasn't visited South Carolina, right, at all?
No, it was one of the places, late February, they were sort of on the list, and then, things got nixed. And so don't believe he's been to South Carolina at all so far.
Yeah, we'll go ahead on a couple of these kids when we have time. And if y'all, let's see. If y'all have any final questions, let me know. Hey, no, hold on. We got to hold on. Darnisha Allen Jackson has joined us. Chris, Sports Mommy is in the house. Love to see that name and that smiling face pop up.
That's awesome. I hope you're doing well.
Yeah, hope you're hanging in there. Hope you're feeling good. And tell Bryson we said, hey, I know he's excited to get back. Chris, he's at Georgia State now, in a coaching role, right?
That's right. I think he's a GA for Sean Elliott down there, or an analyst, GA or analyst. Maybe somebody can correct us on that. But yeah, he's got a role in the football office there. And Bryson did some work for us last year as honestly, I haven't even thought of that really. I'm a little bit mad. He probably won't be able to do any work for us this football season. So I'm a little upset about that. A rival program stole him away, I guess you could say, from us. But he's a sharp guy, really smart football player, which we knew, and he did a great job for us. Look forward to seeing what he does in the coaching industry for sure.
Yeah, Sean Elliott actually, I think, has a pretty good relationship with Gamecock Central. I know he's definitely not negative towards Gamecock Central, but I can't see him letting Bryson do video breakdowns on the side.
I don't think so, man. Nah.
He's working, and those GAs, man, they put in hours. You want to talk about high school coaches putting in hours? They obviously do, but grad assistants, those guys, they work a lot. So, and yeah, Darnisha did confirm that he is a grad assistant. But yeah, great to see. And Sports Mommy is still on Gamecock Central. So I know Bryson is no longer at South Carolina, but you can tell Miss Darnisha could not quit us. So she's still around. I used to love running into her after games or before games at Williams-Brice and catching up, and really good friend of the site and personal friend of mine. So I hope that she is doing well, and glad to see that name pop up as we go through our chat here. Let's see, what else we got here, Chris. Kyle Foster says Jaden Hood is a dude for him. Do you know who Jaden Hood is, Chris?
Yeah. We Jaden Hood's a kid that we mentioned recently. He's out of St. Thomas Aquinas down in South Florida. And is someone that the staff's taught with a good bit recently. Linebacker prospect, listed as an athlete by Rivals, could play some different positions, but most schools, South Carolina, Kentucky, several others like him as a linebacker. He's, 6'2", 205 or so. Looks like he might be like a Mike or Will linebacker type. And so he's another kid that he's taken a really slow approach. He has not visited anywhere outside of the state of Florida. I think he's been to Miami, UF, maybe Florida State. And so South Carolina is definitely on his visit list. They've been recruiting him, for a little bit now. He's been keeping in touch with Rod Wilson, with Will Muschamp. I think Travaris Robinson he mentioned to us. So he's one to definitely keep an eye on once things reopen.
Well, they're in good shape with several linebackers. I feel this. I got a feeling you look at the two they already have committed, and then the potential out there. You look at Jordan Poole in North Carolina. You look at Greg Penn, in DeMatha, plus the two they have committed. This is probably, I think, going to be the best linebacker class that they've signed really in a long time. So we'll see who maybe the third or even fourth guy they get ends up being. But, yeah, I think they're in really good shape with some good linebackers. All right, I'm going to play a couple more of these guys for you before we get out of here. K1 Powell, a guy we've talked about. I believe we mentioned him on Monday, maybe for the first time, but got an offer, Chris, another one of these situations. He got an offer earlier in the process. I think I looked back, it was February. And again, you have a new coach there in Des Kitchings. Des, I think, has sort of prioritized K1 Powell is probably the best way to say it. Had a Zoom meeting, or excuse me, I think it was a FaceTime, he said, actually, with the entire staff earlier, just recently, and really has taken a liking, I think, to South Carolina, and they obviously like him. So you're talking about a player where you sort of have that intersection of the school wants him, and he's very interested in visiting South Carolina. And as you'll see here, I think, I go back, Chris, you remember when Des Kitchings spoke with the media and they asked him what he was looking for in a running back as a recruit? And he said, I want a guy that scores touchdowns. I want a guy that has a knack for the end zone.
Good trade.
You look at this kid, not the biggest, but he really – it's kind of interesting how his recruitment and Raheem Sanders' recruitment are sort of mirroring each other for South Carolina. But I think K1's got a little bit of dog in him too, man. This you watch the film, and this kid just he competes, and obviously he's got some speed to him. And I think Florida State is probably a school to watch out for. Explosive run here. Good grief. But, yeah, I think there's a lot to like, Chris, about K1 Powell.
Yeah, man. I mean, and I know you're closer to that recruitment than I am, but I did check out the film the other day, and you're right. I mean, a good bit to like. And interestingly, you mentioned Florida State. I mean, I think that's a significant player for Raheem Sanders too, so they could end up getting locked in with the Noles. And man, Wes, we mentioned a bunch of schools earlier that Clemson. There's not a ton of head-to-head battles, but Clemson, Georgia, and Auburn, and now North Carolina, Tennessee, all these schools that they've either typically had to deal with, Florida, or some ones that they've dealt with in the past that are rising again, like a Tennessee, North Carolina. You don't even think about Florida State. But that's another one. That's just another school that you sort of have to watch out for on the recruiting trail. And so, yeah, I mean, Powell's a guy that, he's actually been on South Carolina's radar as a full staff for a while. But once Des Kitchings, like you said, got on campus, it looks like the heat has been turned up a little bit here. And there's a lot to like. And Kitchings, I think he's got a good eye for running back talent. When you look at some of the guys that he's coached, some of the guys he's recruited and produced in the past, some of them have been highly rated guys like your Nyheim Hines, for example, who is I think a Rivals 100 guy. There have also been some lower ranked guys that either recruited or excelled under him. Zach Stacy, Warren Norman at Vanderbilt, for instance. So he's got a good eye for the position, and this appears to be a guy based on the happenings, on the recruiting trail that he seems to really like, and the tape backs that up.
Yeah, let's get one more in here, Chris. I want to get your thoughts on a guy who I actually did my own little just quick video on, but that's Adam Randall, the Myrtle Beach wide receiver. Can we expect a Palmetto Preps breakdown of Adam Randall at some point as well?
Well, maybe I'll just steal yours if that's all right. I'll just literally just screen cap it. No, maybe so. I think so. I don't want to steal your thunder too much, but this is a guy that we're gonna hear a lot about. So probably so. And he really went on and sort of had an offer frenzy, this spring. A lot of schools in the ACC, SEC, Southeast jump in on him, and South Carolina jumped in as well. Yeah, this is a really high upside kid. When you look at his size, and the way that he moves, the production wasn't huge last year, but he did miss 6 games. And you just look at, again, the size profile, the upside, how he can catch contested balls, double move there down the sideline, takes a lick, holds on to the football. There's just a lot to like because he's a big guy who's fluid in his route running and can catch the ball. And so I think his stock's going to continue to rise, regionally, maybe nationally as well.
Well, I think you're already starting to see some guys in state for this class of 2022. And yeah, Adam's a rising junior. You're already seeing some bigger offer lists, at least at this point in the process, than I think you saw, for this current crop, for the class of 2021 guys. So but there's some guys out there that are more national recruits, and some guys out there that South Carolina is sort of already focusing on. And one thing I mentioned in my video, talking to various people around Myrtle Beach, they just like the toughness in which this kid plays. He runs hard, breaks tackles. He sort of fits, I think, in that mold we were talking about earlier with Raheem Sanders. Once he gets the ball, he's a problem. So I think you like those guys that are going to play the receiver position with physicality, because not all receivers play the game physically. It's kind of, at least in some ways, is a little bit more, it's a skill position. It's a glamour spot, but you want guys that play the position hard and play like that. And he's got a big body type and really can do a lot of things. Golly, man, you look at the receivers that Myrtle Beach has had the last few years. They've had some guys. Obviously, J.J. Jones is the most well known, but they've had several guys in that program that were really, really good. So, all right, let's sort of drop this thing off, and I think that's about all we got. Chris, you got any closing final thoughts on this thing?
No, I think we're good, man. It's been another good, fun Zoom call, YouTube live, and we appreciate everybody tuning in and asking questions. Hope we can continue to do this. Hope we can continue to do this, Wes, even when things are completely open back up. I think this has sort of changed some things for us in terms of the way we're doing things, and probably need to continue doing that.
Yeah, actually, let's get one more question, and I'll let you have this one, Chris. Mark Batts wants to know what's up with Will Register. He was a 4-star. He's 6'5", 250 pounds, good hands. What's been the issue? And I think with Will, he is a guy, I will say, that the new offensive scheme, Chris, I think could maybe be a positive for him, just because they are looking for a bigger bodied inline type blocker to play a big role. So what are your thoughts on the potential, at least, for maybe Will Register to see a little more PT this year?
I can agree with you there. He does fit that mold a little bit better in terms of not being that. You're right. He did show solid hands in high school, when he's come through, and haven't heard any differently since he's been in college. But I think in terms of vertical threat, he's not going to give you as much there. And so I do think maybe a role as that more inline blocker. Mike Bobo's definitely employed that in his offense historically. And look at some of the guys that he had at Georgia, maybe fits that mold. Register does a little bit better. So, tight end as a whole is intriguing because there are a lot of guys. There will be a lot of guys at that position vying for playing time. And so he's been around a while, mostly been a special teams player, but perhaps, he could have a really good, summer and preseason camp, and maybe could work his way into some time. I do think it'll be a crowded room in terms of the competition. There's a number one guy, Nick Muse, behind them, some unknowns. There's certainly some talent there. But I think as far as the career leading up to now, I think some other guys have just been ahead of him, for the most part. But he still has, he'll still have an opportunity, and we'll see where things go from there.
Well, Chris, they've had talent at tight end, man. I mean,
yeah.
The overall talent level at that position has just been outstanding, I think. So that's been a big part of it. When you can sort of be dynamic at the tight end position, as I think we've seen South Carolina have some guys that can be, then that gives you a little extra edge. And I think that's just what we've seen so far, is that they've had some dudes that really can do that, and that has made it hard. But yeah, we'll see what he can do. And who knows? There is sort of a new opportunity there for Will Register, so we'll see if he can take advantage of it. But yeah, that's going to about do it for us. Let's see, Craig, Kyle, Mr. Arnisha, Mark, Chavis, Rodney. See, that was Craig again. Timothy Yates. We appreciate all of you sort of joining in and interacting and all that stuff. We love when we get the questions on here. So if you are sitting there and you haven't asked any questions, then definitely next time we want to hear from you. We want to hear some questions about the Gamecocks. And if you're not a subscriber on Gamecock Central, go there right now, top of the page. You can get a free trial from now until August. That'll get you hooked up really with no strings attached, and you can check out our content. And even if you don't want to do that, just do us a favor, hit subscribe on our YouTube. As I keep saying in all these videos, we are refocused on YouTube videos. There will be content on here definitely almost every weekday. I don't know if there'll always be weekend content, but certainly Monday through Friday, we're going to have something fresh for you as often as possible. So for Chris Clark, I'm Wes Mitchell. Definitely appreciate the time. Definitely hit subscribe, and we will see you guys next time.